day, YouTube, and hello again to my subscribers. Today I'm going to talk about what I think is the biggest trick ever played on every child very early in life. No, I'm not talking about Santa Claus. I'm talking about the other Santa Claus. If you are new to my channel and don't know anything about me, I'll tell you this. I don't believe for 1 second we are living on a rotating sphere as we are all taught in grade school. This video will explain why. I also believe that the people perpetrating this lie we live on consist of a small group of families that possess almost all of the world's wealth and have successfully monopolized the entire world to the point where they literally control every aspect of our lives in multiple ways. They control the oil, the agriculture, the food supply, electricity, water, and all the media outlets, and of course the world's governments. Not to mention a large portion of what we think is our history. They control the Vatican as well as Big Farm. They control what we see on TV, what you hear on the radio, and what you are taught in school. They tell you what's hot and what's not. What's cool and who's a fool. Your choices in life are choices that they give you to choose from, and most of your opinions are shaped to benefit their greed. Your initial opinion about the flat earth is one of those opinions that has been shaped for you and implanted in your mind repeatedly as a child through cartoons and pseudoscience brainwashing programs you see on television. So when I use the term they or them, that is who I'm referring to, along with their merry band of pseudoscientists. Our first formal introduction to the rotating earth comes at an early age. Our minds are impressionable and eager to absorb new information about the world around us. And from the first day of school till our last, we are in a constant cycle of study, memorize, exam, day in and day out, seemingly without end. We remember most of the important stuff, the stuff we use every day, but we forget quite a bit as well. It's my belief that the people running this world have been counting on us to forget a few details about our first introduction to the rotating earth by simply shifting focus, being vague where necessary, and never talking about certain details ever again.
But it was only fantasy. The wall was too high, as you can see. No matter how he tried, he could not break free. And the ones ate into his brain.
I recommend you take a moment here and read through the Teacher's Guide to Teaching Coriolis before I start babbling on about grade school brainwashing techniques. I've read it so many times already, it kind of makes me nauseous, so I don't want to do another read-through. Besides that, I'll be bouncing between paragraphs a bit, and it might be helpful for you if you have at least read through it once. I'll see if I can post a link in the description for you. Otherwise, just Google Teacher's Guide Coriolis and click on the American Meteorological Society. So overall, I believe the prime directive in this lesson is to manipulate young minds to form a mental image of the Earth rotating under the atmosphere, without actually making such a statement, but instead allowing them to form that image in their head themselves by connecting the optical illusion called Coriolis to our first lesson about the atmosphere, and simply by using an airplane and a rotating Earth as a stage prop. Another interesting point about the overallness, if that's a word, the other interesting point about the overallness of this lesson is that although we are manipulated, starting with the first sentence, to think that the Earth's rotation under the atmosphere is supposed to be responsible for swirling wind directions in the opposite hemispheres, there are no clear details offered whatsoever as to how this might physically occur, and that's by design. Naturally, we would have to assume that this is due to friction causing drag at the surface where the atmosphere meets the dirt, as the Earth rotates under the atmosphere. In order for friction to occur, there must be a point of contact between two things, and there must be a difference in speed. In this case, it would have to be the Earth rotating faster than the atmosphere above it to cause a swirling effect in the atmosphere itself. similar to the friction your hand through water would have, creating swirls on either side. Now, think about that for a few minutes. It really is the only logical way for this entire first lesson to make any sense, especially for young minds, and especially considering no additional information or clarification is offered. Not even when the word friction is actually used. Friction is offered as a real force in the last paragraph, but without context as to how it applies. Like I said, we learn only what they want us to learn, the way they want us to learn it, and sometimes simply by omission. So let me break it down for you. The very first words of the first sentence are the Earth's atmosphere, and then it goes on to describe spiral wind patterns and ocean currents. In the same paragraph that begins with the Earth's atmosphere, which is really what this lesson is all about, they go directly to the topic of the Earth rotating under free-moving objects that are detached from the surface. And they do this without indicating any difference between the atmosphere and the object with relation to the Earth rotating under them. Not only that, but the transition from atmosphere to free-moving object starts with other objects, such as planes. Okay? Well, unless I missed something, the only other object other than the planes and boats would have to be what is described in the first sentences preceding this one. And that would have to be the atmosphere. There is no other being spoken of at this point. This is the first implication without explanation that I believe is intentional and is worded in such a way as to leave only one assumption. The Earth rotates under the atmosphere as well as the objects in it. The first sentence also talks about motion along curved paths and spiral winds near the surface. So this already puts the focus on the curved paths due to motion. And next they tell us that planes and boats freely moving horizontally, almost anywhere on Earth, except at the equator of course, turn left or right. This sentence is important for a few reasons. It tells us that an airplane that is detached from the surface is free moving, but then it stipulates a horizontal motion. Well, any object moving in a horizontal straight line would be moving horizontally. It's only a question of speed and trajectory, and I don't see how there could be any other definition for free moving. Free moving is free moving, can move in any direction at any speed. However, the word horizontal is used with specific intent here, as there are apparently rules and limitations to the range of calculations allowed in the education system regarding the trajectory of a free moving airplane over the rotating Earth specifically. In the same sentence, we are also introduced to another important factor regarding Coriolis and its rules of conduct. Coriolis does not exist at the equator. There needs to be perpendicular motion. One of the keys to this deception is in the definition of horizontal. They define the word horizontal to mean motion that is only perpendicular to the rotation of the Earth, meaning only objects moving in a northerly or southerly direction. So by redefining horizontal, they can now draw attention away from the ability of the object to move freely and unconstrained, against or with the rotation of the Earth directly. And by stipulating motion required, and that motion must be perpendicular to the Earth's rotation, they can effectively ignore the Earth's alleged rotation speed of over 1,000 miles at the equator. You know, under the same atmosphere that a plane or helicopter would be bound to, if any of this was real. And all the while, there is still no direct reference to what the first objects were before the other objects, like airplanes, came into the lesson. In case you weren't paying attention to detail here, and most people don't, even this Nova PBS official educational video you have been watching has the curved motion of the airplane going in the opposite direction of what we were originally taught in Lesson 1. Now, regardless of your perspective, the curved path of the northerly or southerly flight would always have to curve westward against the Earth's rotation as the observer rotates to the east. Basic physics of motion, right? And that's exactly as it's taught. But what is taught is actually a trick. and this part deserves its own little breakdown. The first step in this indoctrination process is to establish that the equator is off limits to equations and that there is a distinct difference between north and south. A wall, if you will, a barrier or dividing line. This step is absolutely necessary. Hurricanes can't cross the equator, so they don't want us to visualize planes crossing it. It could easily lead to questions and experiments that could expose the deception. They reinforce that distinction by manipulating our perspective. In the teacher's guidebook, it states that from the viewer's perspective from above the North Pole, objects appear to turn to the right. And from above the South Pole, they appear to turn to the left. From those two perspectives, that is exactly what we would expect to see. Everything converges at the equator. This visualization is intended to guide us to the understanding that the Earth's rotation to the east causes an optical illusion with respect to the object, and the atmosphere is stirred up by the Earth's movement. There is no other way to interpret this. In the PBS educational video, they depict Coriolis as a completely different effect and with a completely different cause. Have a listen.
If you've ever watched the news during a hurricane or wintertime nor'easter, you've probably noticed that big storms spin over time as they travel. In the northern hemisphere, they spin counterclockwise. But if you were watching a storm in the southern hemisphere, you'd see it spinning clockwise. Why do storms spin in different directions depending on their location? And why do they spin in the first place? A storm's rotation is due to something called the Coriolis effect, which is a phenomenon that causes fluids like water and air to curve as they travel across or above Earth's surface. Here's the basic idea. Earth is constantly spinning around its axis from west to east. But because Earth is a sphere and wider in the middle, points on the equator are actually spinning faster around the axis than points near the poles. So imagine you were standing in Texas and had a magic paper airplane that could travel hundreds of miles. If you threw your airplane directly northward, you might think it would land straight north, maybe somewhere in Nebraska. But Texas is actually spinning around Earth's axis faster than Nebraska is, because it's closer to the equator. That means that the paper airplane is spinning faster as well, and when you throw it, that spinning momentum is conserved. So if you threw your paper airplane in a straight line toward the north, it would land somewhere to the right of Nebraska, maybe in Delaware. So from your point of view in Texas, the plane would have taken a curved path to the right. The opposite would happen in the southern hemisphere. An object traveling from the equator to the south would get deflected to the left.
I don't recall any mention of the conservation of momentum in our indoctrination to Coriolis. Do you? Furthermore, if PBS is teaching that the conservation of momentum is the root cause for Coriolis regarding airplanes, where is the science to describe the physical connection of this alleged momentum to the cause of Coriolis in our atmosphere? Not only that, but if the momentum is supposed to be conserved, then why would there be a Coriolis effect to describe with regards to moving objects? That assertion would demand that the airplane retain the Earth's rotation speed throughout the duration of the flight, and that would eliminate the optical illusion from our reality. Unless, of course, the argument becomes the momentum wears off due to friction with the atmosphere, causing the apparent curved path. Well, if that's the case, then once that momentum wears off due to friction with the atmosphere, then why does the Earth still not rotate under a hovering helicopter? And even though the curved motion of the airplane in this educational video is completely backwards from what we were first taught, and the physical dynamics of how this is supposed to happen has been bastardized, this is actually closer to the reality of Coriolis than Lesson 1 in the guidebook is. Have a look at this.
With a simple game of catch, I think I've found a way to show an effect that will have you doubting your very own eyes. Now, they don't know it yet, but our budding ball players sitting on our specially rigged merry-go-round are about to demonstrate a rather astonishing optical illusion.
Right, here's the game, right? You're going to throw the ball straight. So what's your name? Victor, right? Yeah. But this time, I'm going to complicate things slightly. I'm going to rotate the merry-go-round counterclockwise. So you throw it whilst it's moving. What's going to happen?
I don't know why, but I feel like if we're going fast enough,
yeah,
like I might actually be the one catching the ball.
Okay, so you're going to throw it and you're going to catch it. All right.
Yeah. I don't know.
Right, what's going to happen, dude?
I was going to veer off to the left.
So the ball is going to swerve off to the left.
Yep.
And you might catch it.
Possibly.
Okay, good. Right, so what's going to happen?
I think it's just going to come straight to me, and I'm going to catch it like the champion that I am.
Show me the catch. Okay, great. Right, okay, so everyone... No, hang on, one more. Spencer.
He's not arrogant.
Just quietly confident.
He's not catching it. He's
Really?
not catching it, no.
So what's going to happen to the ball?
I'm catching it. It's right here.
Great, so we've got one saying to go off to you, one saying comes to you, Spencer, and you think it goes straight ahead, but you think you'll be the one catching it.
Yeah.
Now remember, the ball will be thrown straight across the spinning merry-go-round, but where will it end up? Will it be caught by the thrower? Will it be caught by the person opposite? Will it be caught by the person to the thrower's left? Or by the person to the thrower's right?
Right, in your own time, throw the ball.
I got this.
Whoa!
So the answer was D. It was caught by the person on the thrower's right. Our camera angles seem to show the ball bend in the air. So is that a camera effect, or are we seeing what they saw?
Hang on, this couldn't get much more simple. The idea was just to throw the ball straight to Victor to show us his amazing catching skills.
That's right.
Yeah, it did. It just curved right over this way.
So let me get this straight. So somehow you threw the ball, it left your hands, and then what?
And then it just got sucked over to him.
In the air.
Yeah, I threw a perfect throw.
What did you see?
Yeah, curved right in.
Right, so we're all agreeing here the ball curved in midair.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you didn't cheat this at all?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And do you know why it did that?
No.
Nope.
No idea. It's called the Coriolis effect. And it's very simple. It's objects in motion appearing to be, it's an optical illusion, appearing to be deflected off their intended course. So what's actually happening here is you are throwing this ball. You can only throw a ball in a straight line. Can I clear that up straight away?
Yes.
Even though it appears in your eyes to be bending. So you throw the ball straight, it's still going straight, but the table is moving below you, and all of a sudden, look who's in front of that straight moving ball, and it looks like it's bent off to the right because you're still looking at the guy you were intending to throw it to, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Coriolis effect.
So as you see, Coriolis in its pure form works completely backwards from what we were first taught as children. It curves with the rotation, not against it. The first lesson paints this picture in our young minds, to solidify the connection to wind directions in the opposing hemispheres, with the equatorial rotation speed of over 1,000 miles per hour ripping a path right through the middle. If you doubt me, reread paragraph 4 of the teacher's guide. That's where our perspectives were hijacked in the first place. They use a twisted version of the Coriolis to etch an image in our minds. Do you remember what I said at the start? They are counting on our young minds to forget about the first lesson on Coriolis. And most of us did. You probably did too. Then they wait a few years until early high school in Geography 101 to mention the hurricanes again. By then, you've forgotten the small details, but you remember there is definitely a connection, so you don't even think to question any further. And if by some chance you come across it again later in life, as I did, you find a completely bastardized version of what you learned so many years ago as a young child. The details elude you, so you simply trust what you see because you trust the source. Are you getting the picture? This twisted interpretation of Coriolis is the one and only reason we believe that the rotating Earth influences the winds. And it had to be taught back-assward in order for us to create the mental imagery necessary. Then they cover up one lie with another, and neither one of these lies offers any direct explanation of how the physical Earth, with its physical rotation, has a physical impact on the physical atmosphere. Although I do think the lie number 1 makes more physical sense. It's still fucked, and in no way does it match observable reality. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah. The second paragraph has its own kind of charm. They confirm once again that objects detached from the surface can move freely and unconstrained, Then they drag poor Isaac Newton and his laws of motion into it, just to confirm and describe objects moving in straight paths. As in the first paragraph, we are reminded again that it is strictly the optical illusion of a detached object moving in a horizontal straight line that is considered worthy of formula and calculation, along with a straight-up reminder that none of this happens at the equator. That statement is made often in this teacher's guidebook. And for some reason, there is never discussion, lesson, or even a reference to how the same physics that make the Coriolis effect even possible would affect aviation itself, especially at the equator. The next two paragraphs are basically just a review of the first two paragraphs, with an additional written description of what we would expect to see and measure, if anything from the first two paragraphs is actually true. The last page on page 1 of Lesson 1 of the Teacher's Guide to Teaching the Coriolis Effect is by far my favorite. But let's do a quick review here first. In the first 4 paragraphs, we are described, repetitiously I might add, a simple optical illusion created by two moving objects, a plane flying in a straight line over a rotating sphere. And it is established that objects detached from the surface are free to move in an unconstrained manner. That would mean, by definition, that an object under its own power could change direction or even stop and hover, as is the case with the helicopter, and the Earth would continue to rotate under it. At this point, we have already made the mental connection to the Earth rotating under the atmosphere as it would with the objects that are in the atmosphere. The focus is then immediately taken away from the free-moving aspect and put solely on the new redefined definition of horizontal. Then, by further reinforcing the object in motion aspect of the optical illusion, combined with the newly redefined horizontal, which is repeated in every paragraph, they successfully abolished the need to equate or even discuss the effects of the Earth's rotation at the equator. But that's not quite enough, and this is where paragraph 5 comes into play. They need to link this optical illusion to at least one other form of measurable reality to make it all believable. Because as we all know, the Earth simply does not rotate 15 degrees per hour to the east under a hovering helicopter, hot air balloon, or even the atmosphere. So, without some reality-based and observable phenomenon to attach this optical illusion to, and without another focus point, the focus would stay on the moving objects, and eventually it would be found out, through testing and experimentation, like it has already been done several times over, that the Earth simply does not rotate under anything. Well, back before the Coriolis effect was ever connected to the wind directions in the classroom, there was a known phenomenon where the hurricanes generally rotate in the opposite directions north and south of the equator. But there was no agreed upon explanation within the scientific community at that time. So, because the Coriolis effect, in essence, is nothing more than an optical illusion at its very root, scientists simply create a formula to quantify the visual effect of an object moving in a straight line over a rotating sphere, a visual image that was necessary to implant in your mind at an early age, and then, just as they redefine the word horizontal to fit the controlled range of calculations they wanted and eliminate the need to pay attention to the equator at all, they simply invent an imaginary new force, and they call it the Coriolis force. And by simply asserting from this point forward that the Coriolis formulas explain the difference between the north and south hemispheres, we simply accept it because it's the only reality presented to us, and it's presented when we are too young to apply critical thought to the lesson being taught. The last paragraph reads, "Scientists account for the Coriolis effect by inventing an imaginary force called the Coriolis force. This imaginary force is then applied in combination with real forces, as the pressure gradient force and friction, to explain motions of objects in terms of Newton's laws. The Coriolis effect is defined as acting perpendicular to the direction of motion, right in the northern hemisphere and left in the south. It is all necessary because the Earth turns." As in every paragraph, the last paragraph reminds us for one last time that the Earth turns only under moving objects and that Coriolis only accounts if the object is moving north or south. They also mention friction here for the first time. But, like I said before, they don't add any further detail. However, this entire lesson is implying that the Earth's rotation is the primary cause of Coriolis as it rotates under objects and the atmosphere that they are bound to. I believe that they are intentionally being vague in the use of the word, because if you search about Coriolis friction today, you will not find any details whatsoever regarding friction due to the Earth's rotation as we are initially manipulated to believe. You will see for yourself, should you care to search, that the Coriolis presented today is completely disconnected from Lesson 1 in the teacher's guidebook. We are led to believe that the Earth is rotating under things, atmosphere included, but they do not get specific about the physical effects that this would have. I believe this is because they want to keep focus away from the real physical effects of the Earth rotating under the atmosphere as far from our minds as possible. But, at the same time, they need us to have the picture implanted in our minds of this optical illusion so we can mentally visualize how the Earth's rotation could possibly affect wind directions in the opposing hemispheres as it rotates under the atmosphere. And it was all necessary because the Earth turns. In order to make it all tangible, they had to connect the math to it, and the only way that could be done was to invent an imaginary force, and then assert that there was a connection. We accept the assertion simply because we are just the right age to understand the visualization intended, but too young to remember details. Not that we were really given any details, and too young to question it with a critical mind. They taught us one thing, but they keep us distracted by repeating another for the rest of our lives. Repetition breeds belief, and if you say it enough times, they will believe it. Maybe if they told us they invented a fluffy zebra-striped unicorn enough times, we would believe that as well. That way, when they tell us they named it Mr. Fluffy, it would make perfect sense. Anyways, it's my opinion that no truly scientific body would ever allow themselves, or anyone else for that matter, to include and or combine anything fictitious or imaginary into any formulas, equations, or calculations that are meant to be representative of the true world around us. It's also my opinion that the method used to implant the concepts of the rotating Earth in the mind of young children is deceitful in nature and done with specific intent. Intent by the people that want to keep us quiet and contained within this geographically limited world they present to us as fact when we are too young to question it. The same people that are spraying our skies with heavy metals to combat global warming that they created in the first place by keeping us blindly dependent on gas, oil, and coal to power our nations, while at the same time suppressing the technology for clean, inexpensive power. The same people that don't allow any reporting of this on any of their news channels around the world because they own and control all the media worldwide. You hear what they want you to hear. And what they want you to hear follows an agenda of propaganda designed to keep you worried and distracted. The last thing they would want is a world where people have the peace of mind and the time to think about anything for themselves. Just as they manipulated the wording in the Teacher's Guide to Teaching the Coriolis Effect to distract you from the reality of the inherent physical effects that would take place at the equator, they control every word that is broadcast through your television and every word you read in every book for your entire life. It is a well thought out and orchestrated lie, unquestionably. But like any lie, it simply is not the truth. And if you poke at it enough, the truth will reveal itself. These are the same people that are lying to you about the physical ground you stand on and what it means to be standing on that ground. The Earth is indeed flat and stationary, and is easily proven if anyone cares to take the time to look for themselves. A simple review of a few key facts involving natural physics is all it really takes. That and the desire to understand the deception that most of us know as reality. Once you understand the scope of the deception, and make no mistake about it, people, there is most definitely a deception in play. The lies become very obvious. I don't expect to convince you of this by simply making these statements. That's a process you must go through to prove it to yourself. But by reminding you about the Coriolis effect, Lesson 1, Page 1, and revisiting it with an inquisitive, critical thinking adult mindset, you will see that there is definitely design and intent involved, especially when you try to ask the questions and find out that all the so-called scientific literature does is describe weather patterns, and never a word written about the root cause that we were all indoctrinated to believe, and all the references seem to circle back around to themselves, never to revisit or even mention the detached and free-moving objects again, when right from the first paragraph, The objects directly related to the atmosphere were of primary concern. That's about all I really have to say on the matter for now, I guess. If and when you finally wake up to the deception and realize the ultimate truth of our situation, please try to wake up others. It's the only way to make real change in a world controlled by a small group of power-hungry, slave-driving criminal families that happen to possess the bulk of the world's wealth. I hope this was helpful, informative, and somewhat eye-opening despite my personal opinions. Thanks for watching. Real eyes, real lies. Wake up, guys. Let's talk about this. Peace.